In the cold dungeons beneath Europe's grandest castles, the faint sound of dripping water mixed with muffled groans. These were not the cries of the dying, but of the broken. Here, under the flicker of torches and the heavy stench of rot, the thumbscrew reigned as one of the most feared instruments of interrogation. The device itself appeared deceptively simple, a small metal clamp with two flat, grooved plates connected by a screw. Yet in the hands of inquisitors, it became a weapon of methodical agony. The prisoner's thumbs, or sometimes fingers, were placed between the plates, and the screw was slowly turned. Iron pressed against bone, crushing nerves, splitting skin, and grinding joints to powder. Unlike the rack or the wheel, the thumbscrew left no dramatic spectacle. There was no screaming crowd, no public execution. Its cruelty was quiet, intimate. The victim's face twisted, veins bulged, and lips trembled as bones cracked beneath the slow, unrelenting pressure. The silence of the dungeon magnified every faint gasp and stifled sob. Historians trace its earliest use to medieval Germany, where it was known as the Schraubstock or screw vice. From there, it spread like a plague, adopted by inquisitors in Spain, judges in England, and soldiers across France and the Low Countries. Its portability made it perfect for war camps, where captives were forced to reveal secrets on the march. In the 16th century, during the height of religious persecution, the thumbscrew found new purpose. The Protestant Reformation had torn Europe apart. Faith became a battlefield, and confession a weapon. Heretics were not always burned, some were crushed. The thumbscrew became a quiet alternative to the stake, extracting names, alliances, and oaths in whispered pain. One of the earliest recorded victims was a German bookseller named Lucas Reinhardt in 1538. Arrested for distributing banned Lutheran texts, he refused to renounce his faith. The inquisitors took him to a damp cell lit by a single candle. They offered mercy if he recanted. When he stayed silent, they produced the small iron tool. At first, Lucas laughed bitterly, mocking its size, but when the screw began to turn, his laughter vanished. The pain was unlike fire or blade. It was slow, concentrated, burrowing into the bones. The sound of his breaking thumbs echoed in the chamber. When they reached the second hand, he fainted. He confessed before dawn, not with words, but with the trembling of a man whose faith had been fractured as deeply as his fingers. The power of the thumbscrew lay not only in its brutality, but in its precision. Inquisitors could control every turn, every degree of torment. It could maim without killing, ensuring the prisoner remained conscious to answer questions or suffer more. To the torturers, it was a tool of control, a way to measure obedience inch by inch. In Scotland, during the witch trials of the 17th century, a more vicious version emerged, known as the pillywinks. Iron ridges were added to the plates, ensuring the flesh tore as easily as it was crushed. The accused, often women, were tied to chairs in freezing chambers. Their hands were laid bare. The pillywinks bit into their fingers while interrogators demanded names of other witches. Many confessed to impossible crimes simply to end the pain. Margaret Aitken, the so-called Great Witch of Balwearie, became infamous during this time. When accused, she denied the charge. The inquisitors applied the thumbscrew. After 3 turns, her nails split. After 5, her fingers bled. On the 7th turn, she screamed that she had seen other witches flying through the night. Her words condemned hundreds. Her broken hands became tools of false testimony. In Catholic Spain, the thumbscrew was often paired with religious interrogation. Priests would recite prayers as the screw tightened, insisting that confession would free the soul. The cruel irony was that salvation required agony. Some victims kissed the iron, believing pain was their path to heaven. Others cursed God before their voices were silenced forever. The device also saw military use during the 30 Years' War. Captured spies were brought before commanders who demanded battle plans or troop positions. Soldiers carried portable thumbscrews in their pouches, lightweight instruments of persuasion. In frozen camps, men screamed as their hands were crushed to the rhythm of turning screws. Secrets flowed with blood. What made the thumbscrew uniquely terrifying was its endurance. It did not rely on elaborate setups or manpower. One man and a small device could destroy another's will. Even after the rack fell out of favor, the thumbscrew remained in use for centuries. It was cheap, quiet, and devastatingly efficient. In England, during the reign of Elizabeth I, recusant Catholics were sometimes subjected to thumbscrews for refusing to attend Anglican services. The state saw it not as torture but as encouragement. Official records describe it as a gentle means of correction. Yet the victim's bones told a different story. A letter from 1595 describes the experience of a Jesuit priest named Thomas Whitmore. "They bound me by the wrists and placed the iron upon my thumbs," he wrote. "The first turn drew blood. The second made me see stars. On the third, I thought my hands would burst. My prayers became screams, and I felt as if my soul were crushed with my bones." His words reveal the device's insidious nature. It attacked not just the body, but the spirit. The victim watched their own hands destroyed, the tools of prayer and labor reduced to mangled flesh. It was a punishment that robbed them of agency, forcing them to witness their own disintegration. By the 18th century, the thumbscrew had become a symbol of state cruelty. Enlightenment thinkers condemned it as barbaric, yet it lingered in prisons and colonies. Even as science advanced and monarchies fell, iron screws continued to twist in secret chambers. The simplicity of its design made it impossible to erase entirely. There are preserved examples in European museums today, blackened with rust, still bearing traces of human use. Visitors often pass by, unaware of the screams once trapped within those grooves. Some replicas are displayed beside racks and branding irons, but none possess the same haunting intimacy. For the victims, the thumbscrew was not merely an instrument of pain. It was an encounter with silence itself. No grand spectacle, no audience, just the quiet pressure of metal and the breaking of flesh. It forced truth not through fire or spectacle, but through endurance. And so, beneath the vaulted stone ceilings of Europe's dungeons, the thumbscrew turned, slow, steady, merciless. It was the sound of control disguised as justice, a whisper of suffering in a world already drowning in blood and faith. By the dawn of the 17th century, the thumbscrew had become a fixture of Europe's judicial and religious machinery. It was no longer the weapon of individual inquisitors. It was the silent enforcer of kings, bishops, and magistrates. Across the continent, in the basements of courthouses and beneath monastery floors, men and women were made to kneel before the cold iron of obedience. In the dungeons of the Spanish Inquisition, the sound of the turning screw was a common hymn. Beneath the great cathedrals of Toledo and Seville, cells reeked of mold and fear. There, prisoners accused of blasphemy or heresy faced a choice: confess to sins they did not commit, or let their bones be ground to dust. The inquisitors believed pain purified. To them, the screams were prayers, and the crushed fingers proof of divine cleansing. Father Diego de Aranda, a Dominican inquisitor, kept meticulous records of his sessions. In one surviving manuscript, he wrote, "The instrument of thumb correction brings forth truth when the tongue will not." He described with chilling calm how each turn of the screw revealed the secrets of the accused, whether they were guilty or not. To Diego, truth was not discovered, but extracted. One such victim was a Jewish converso named Isabel de Luna, accused of secretly practicing her old faith. Her hands were bound upon a wooden table, her delicate fingers resting within the metal jaws. A priest whispered prayers while an officer turned the screw. Her nails split, her bones cracked, and her voice rose in trembling pleas for mercy. Between sobs, she confessed to anything they wished to hear. Her confession saved her life, but her hands never healed. In France, during the wars of religion, the thumbscrew became a military instrument. Protestant and Catholic armies alike used it to interrogate spies and prisoners. The battlefield needed no courtroom. Captured messengers were stripped of armor and dragged to makeshift tents where officers kept iron vices among their maps and daggers. One turn for silence, two for truth, three for names. Few could endure more. Captain Henri Dulorme, a commander in the service of the French crown, was known for his ruthless efficiency. His men captured a Huguenot courier near Orléans carrying coded letters. The man refused to speak, invoking the Lord's protection. Dulorme smiled and produced a small wooden box containing a brass thumbscrew. "Let us see if your Lord will save your thumbs," he said. After 7 turns, The courier revealed the cipher and the names of his allies. His hands hung limp, forever ruined. Even in England, where legal reform had begun to question torture, the thumbscrew remained in secret use. During the reign of James I, it was employed against Catholics suspected of treason. The infamous gunpowder plot conspirators were said to have faced such torment before their confessions. Though official records were vague, accounts whispered of broken hands hidden beneath their sleeves during trial. By the mid-1600s, Scotland perfected its own version, the booties and the pillywinks. The booties crushed legs, while the pillywinks focused on fingers. Together, they created a symphony of suffering. The witch hunters of Edinburgh found them particularly useful. They called their chamber the Room of Obedience. Few left that room unbroken. One chilling testimony survives from 1662, given by a jailer named Samuel Knox. He wrote of a woman, Agnes Fenton, accused of witchcraft in Aberdeen. She denied all, saying she had no truck with the devil. The examiner did then order the pillywinks be applied. With each turn she cried to Christ. On the 6th her finger bones did crumble. On the 7th she named her neighbour as a witch. Her neighbour was hanged weeks later. Agnes herself died in prison, unable to feed herself. In many ways, the thumbscrew's quietness made it more dangerous than louder forms of torture. There was no blood that could not be washed, no limb lost that could not be hidden. A prisoner could emerge from interrogation appearing whole, save for the shaking hands, the missing nails, and the hollow eyes. Judges could claim that no torture was used, even as the victim's hands told another story. The device spread beyond Europe's borders through conquest and colonization. When Spanish forces reached the Americas, they carried thumbscrews with their crosses and muskets. Indigenous leaders who resisted conversion or tribute payments were subjected to the same twisting agony that had silenced heretics in Europe. In Mexico and Peru, native accounts describe iron clamps that ate the hands of the chiefs. The empire expanded through faith and fear, both enforced by the screw. Meanwhile, in Germany during the 30 Years' War, entire villages fell under the control of mercenary bands who used the thumbscrew as a means of extortion. Blacksmiths forged hundreds of them, sometimes decorated with initials or crests. The instruments became as common as shackles. A farmer's refusal to pay tribute could mean the crushing of his son's fingers before his eyes. The tool's simplicity made it endlessly replicable. A haunting record from 1633 tells of the village of Weidenberg, where Swedish troops demanded grain and silver. When the villagers protested, the commander ordered their elder forward. His thumbs were placed in the screw, and before the first bone broke, the villagers yielded. No blood was spilled, no sword drawn, just the soft groan of metal turning against flesh. The commander called it peace through pressure. In the archives of the Vatican, a letter dated 1679 mentions the little iron that makes great sinners confess. It was a veiled reference to the thumbscrew used even within the church's walls. The letter's author, a confessor of the Holy Office, admitted shame. It serves the truth, yet it mocks God's mercy. Such contradictions defined the age, the belief that salvation could be extracted by pain. Women, in particular, bore the brunt of its cruelty. Midwives accused of witchcraft, widows accused of heresy, and even nuns accused of doubt were subjected to its grasp. For them, the thumbscrew was not merely an instrument, it was a message that even the gentlest hands could be punished for touching forbidden truths. The device's endurance was owed to its efficiency. It required no fire, no rope, no preparation, only patience. Torturers valued it for its precision. They could increase or release pain in an instant. It was the illusion of control that made it so seductive. A single turn could spare or destroy. By the end of the century, critics began to speak against such methods. Philosophers of the Enlightenment called torture a relic of barbarism, but governments and armies still used it in secret, justified by necessity. The thumbscrew, portable and discreet, survived even as dungeons gave way to prison cells. Its small frame made it easy to hide, its history easier still to deny. In the cold archives of European justice, ledgers record the names of those interrogated by manual pressure. They are countless. The details differ, the crimes, the confessions, but the method is always the same: iron screw, silence. And in that silence, the echoes of obedience still linger. The sound of power turning slowly, crushing truth into submission, one turn at a time. By the dawn of the 18th century, Europe had begun to awaken from the darkness of its tortured past. Empires were expanding, science was questioning superstition, and the word enlightenment began to replace Inquisition. Yet in the quiet, unseen corners of power, the thumbscrew still turned. Its victims now hidden not beneath cathedrals or castles, but behind the walls of prisons and colonies. In England, the official use of torture was declared illegal in 1640, yet secret cells still whispered of manual correction. Even as Parliament spoke of liberty, spies and political dissidents vanished into underground chambers. The thumbscrew had simply changed masters. No longer the tool of priests, it had become the silent servant of statesmen. A letter from the Tower of London, dated 1702, records the interrogation of a Jacobite sympathizer named William Kerr. The jailer's notes describe the method used: a small vice of iron, applied to both thumbs, sufficient to compel truth without loss of limb. Kerr was accused of plotting rebellion. When he refused to name his associates, the vice was tightened. After the fourth turn, his fingers snapped audibly. His confession followed within minutes. His execution came 3 days later. The irony was that the Enlightenment, with all its talk of reason, did little to end cruelty. It simply made it quieter. Torture was now conducted in the name of security, not salvation. The thumbscrew's simplicity suited the age. It left few marks, could be concealed, and extracted obedience without spectacle. Across the Atlantic, the device crossed oceans aboard colonial ships. In the New World, enslaved Africans and indigenous leaders found themselves subject to the same twisted logic of correction. In Spanish Florida, priests used the thumbscrew on native converts who resisted labor in missions. In the Caribbean, slave masters kept smaller versions forged from brass, known as finger screws. They used them as punishment for defiance, tools of terror disguised as discipline. An account from Barbados in 1736 describes a runaway slave named Cato, recaptured after weeks of hiding. His master ordered the iron screw brought forth. Cato's fingers were crushed until he begged forgiveness. His hands never healed, yet he was forced to labor again, proof that the screw was not only an instrument of confession, but of ownership. It broke the will as easily as it broke bone. Meanwhile, in continental Europe, a strange fascination with instruments of torture began to grow. Collectors, nobles, and physicians began to acquire old devices from closed dungeons, calling them curiosities of cruelty. The thumbscrew, small and unassuming, became a prized specimen, its horror admired behind glass instead of wielded in darkness. One physician in Vienna, Dr. Karl von Eltz, kept a collection of medieval tools for scientific study. In his journals, he wrote of testing replicas of the thumbscrew on cadaver hands to understand the threshold of bone pressure. His words are chillingly clinical. The crushing point occurs at 2.5 turns. Beyond this, splintering is inevitable. He saw the instrument as data, not damnation. By the late 18th century, the thumbscrew's legacy had transformed from instrument to symbol. Writers and philosophers used it as a metaphor for tyranny, the slow, invisible pressure of power against the common man. Yet in practice, it continued to appear wherever fear and authority met in secret. The French Revolution itself, which promised liberty, saw its own quiet cruelties. While the guillotine ruled the streets, dungeons still used the screw to extract names of counter-revolutionaries. In 1793, during the Reign of Terror, a young aristocrat named Etienne Laval was arrested for hiding royalists in his cellar. He was taken to a subterranean room beneath the Hôtel de Ville. The interrogator, a former blacksmith turned revolutionary officer, used a small rusted thumbscrew inherited from the Bastille. Etienne's hands, once accustomed to fine gloves, were placed between the plates. With each turn, he shouted the names of friends and servants. When it was done, his hands were shattered, but his life was spared. The revolution that promised equality had merely replaced one cruelty with another. As Europe entered the 19th century, the thumbscrew began to fade from use, but not from memory. Abolitionists and reformers displayed the instrument at rallies to shock audiences. They spoke of the iron of oppression, holding up real examples recovered from prisons. Newspapers published sketches of its design, warning that civilization was never far from barbarism. The message was clear. Cruelty could wear the mask of law, and silence could crush more than bones.